I can still remember the moment, sharp and silent, like a shadow creeping slowly over a fading sunset. It wasn't a loud awakening, no dramatic thunderclap or sudden revelation. It was quieter, a hollowing inside me that whispered I wasn't truly alive anymore. I looked around at the world I moved through daily, at conversations I took part in, smiles I forced onto my face, and obligations I fulfilled without question. Everything seemed normal on the surface. But inside, something had slipped away, leaving only an echo of existence rather than the vibrant pulse of life. There's a strange kind of loneliness in living that way. It's like being trapped behind a glass wall, watching others laugh, celebrate, and breathe in the richness of simple moments while you remain stuck in a fog you can't quite shake off. I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing on me even in moments I was supposedly resting. The kind of rest that should refresh and heal just tossed me deeper into that strange emptiness. My heart raced sometimes for no clear reason. My mind leapt into hypothetical future threats before I could even blink, and the joy I used to feel in mundane things. Watching the sunset, chatting with friends, savoring a meal, they all seemed just out of reach, like a mist I couldn't grasp. That feeling was more than just worry. Anxiety wasn't just a fleeting fear or stress. It had seeped into every crack of my day-to-day existence, dulling colors and muffling sounds. I was alive, yes, but I wasn't living. I was surviving. I remember trying to explain it to someone once, how my smiles felt brittle, how the steady hum of life around me made me feel simultaneously claustrophobic and hollow. But you do so much, they said. You work hard. You show up. Doesn't that count as living? I wanted to say, yes, I'm here breathing air and moving through time, but the truth clawed at me. I'm missing something essential. The nervous energy that filled my chest and the restless thoughts that never let me be present swallowed the pleasure out of moments I yearned to enjoy. This wasn't simply about motivation or gratitude, either. Lots of people have tough days and still find reasons to smile. I could be grateful. I was, without question. But gratitude was no match for that gnawing sensation. A system overwhelmed, a mind wired to anticipate the worst, a body stuck on alert. I began noticing subtle changes in how anxiety was quietly robbing joy, little betrayals that felt like betrayals of myself. The almost invisible exhaustion that left me physically present but emotionally absent. The way I couldn't really surrender to the warmth of a lazy afternoon or the calm of a simple conversation because my thoughts darted away to what-ifs. There were times I'd say yes to something fun only to find my heart pounding beneath the surface, my stomach twisting with unease. I realized I was confusing what felt safe with what felt fulfilling, choosing comfort over growth, predictability over experience. The irony was painful. The very mechanisms I used to protect myself were the ones chaining me. I remember sitting by the window one evening, watching the city lights flicker on like stars brought down to earth, and I asked myself, when did this happen? When did life stop being a dance and become a form of endurance? I was tired of feeling like I was holding my breath, waiting for some future moment when I could finally relax or be happy, if that moment ever came. What I wanted more than anything was to feel alive, not just existing, not just making it through, but really, deeply alive in the here and now. That's the story I want to share with you, not because it's unique or extraordinary, but because I know it's one many of us live quietly, ashamed to admit how deeply anxiety can reach. It's not just in the frantic panic attacks or the obvious fears, but in those small, everyday ways anxiety steals the very thing we crave most, the ability to savor life itself. I'd like to walk with you through that space where living slips into surviving, where the mind traps us in a cycle of anticipation and dread that shadows every moment. And I want us both to come out on the other side, not by pretending it's all about positive thinking or quick fixes, but by understanding what's really happening beneath the surface and how to start reclaiming presence, joy, and a genuine connection to life once again. If you've ever felt like you're performing happiness, or that your mind keeps pulling you away from the now, then this is for you. Because here, within this quiet struggle, something powerful waits to be uncovered. Something real, raw, and transformative. We're not alone in this. And this moment, the way it feels, the questions it stirs, is the beginning of a path that can bring us back to ourselves. Sometimes, when I try to pinpoint exactly how anxiety infiltrates my days, I notice it's not always the obvious moments that betray me. It's often in the quiet hesitations, the almost imperceptible shifts in my attention and energy that slip past unnoticed if I'm not paying close attention. One afternoon, for example, I found myself perched on a park bench, daylight fading slowly as shadows stretched long between trees. A friend called me over to join a game of catch, laughter bubbling from their circle. I wanted to say yes. I truly did, but a stubborn knot tightened in my stomach, whispering caution and what if. I hesitated too long, and that moment collapsed into distance. It was a painful reminder that anxiety extends its roots into the very fabric of our choices, sometimes owning the narrative before we even realize it. This experience unfolded a new layer of understanding for me. Anxiety doesn't always arrive as a roar. Often, it's a muffled murmur guiding us away from the possibility of risk or vulnerability. While it may appear as prudence on the outside, inside it can be a barricade, quietly steering my steps away from the vibrant unknown. I started noticing how frequently I defaulted to safety, not because I craved dullness or loneliness, but because the lure of discomfort felt overwhelming. It was as if my nervous system instinctively built walls, brick by invisible brick, around my heart's natural curiosity and openness. I recall a time when I reluctantly attended a small gathering. The chatter buzzed overhead, and faces blurred with half-remembered names. In the midst of the crowd, I felt an invisible weight anchoring me to awkwardness. My thoughts raced. Did I prepare properly? Am I interesting enough? What if I say the wrong thing? Each question chipped away at any chance of spontaneous joy. Even though the environment wasn't threatening, my body behaved as if I were perched at the edge of a cliff, ready to fall. This constant hypervigilance left me disconnected in moments designed for connection, a sharp irony that gnawed at me for weeks after. Discovering that anxiety commandeers my sense of safety often surprised me. Throughout my life, I equated feeling secure with being happy, yet I've come to realize this is a precarious illusion. It's a silent trap that makes me mistake comfort for fulfillment. The quiet evenings spent tucked away from social engagements or thrills, while seemingly peaceful, were actually a symptom of my system craving rest from an ongoing battle. I was mistaking sheltering from emotional storms with wholehearted living. This awakening unsettled me because it meant confronting the fact that my protective mechanisms were unintentionally imprisoning me. I remember a moment when I sat alone, cup of lukewarm tea in hand, observing raindrops tracing random paths down the window pane. It struck me that my anticipation of tragedy kept me locked inside a prison of what might happen, blocking out the vibrance of what is. The wariness that governed my reactions eroded spontaneity and muted the colors of everyday life. Moments that could have been filled with delight or peace were dulled by an invisible filter of apprehension. When anxiety wages its subtle war inside us, it doesn't merely drain energy, it distorts our perception of possibility itself. Think about how often I found myself weighing decisions against imagined catastrophes, rehearsing disasters in my head until they became more vivid than reality. I noticed a pattern where potential experiences were sifted through a sieve of doubt and fear, filtering out almost everything except threat. This constant scanning for danger was exhausting, leaving me paralyzed to embrace novelty. I realized that this unending anticipation was robbing me not only of joy, but of the richness that comes from unpredictability. Let me share another memory. I once declined an invitation to a weekend trip, citing work pressures and fatigue. But deep down, fear was the puppeteer. Fear of uncertainty, of unfamiliar places and faces, and the challenge of stepping beyond my routines. The shame of turning down opportunity weighed heavily afterward, a bitter aftertaste of missed chance. This pattern repeated in various forms, a reluctance to try new foods, to speak up in meetings, or to venture beyond safe social circles. Anxiety wove an intricate net that caught my aspirations and held them back with invisible strands. When you confront your own tendencies to avoid discomfort, you begin to unmask how much anxiety disguises itself as reason. It tells stories of responsibility and pragmatism, while quietly eroding your confidence and authenticity. Accepting this is a painful, necessary phase. much like learning to recognize a mirage shimmering in the distance. What appears secure may only be an illusion, masking the swirling undercurrents of fear and avoidance underneath. One day, I sat with a trusted friend and confessed this realization. Their response was simple yet profound. It's okay to be afraid. Fear becomes a problem only when it keeps you from living your truths. Their words created space for new understanding. I saw that my nervous system, although burdened, was not the enemy but a messenger. It signals overwhelm and exhaustion, urging me to pay attention and find balance rather than to resign to withdrawal. The gradual unfolding of this awareness taught me that reclaiming life from anxiety requires more than wishful thinking or surface-level fixes. It demands patience and gentle curiosity toward the ways I limit myself. Now, I am learning to tune into moments when the instinct to retreat arises and invite a different response, perhaps a breath, a small step forward, or simply acknowledging my fear without judgment. Through this practice, I glimpsed the possibility of regaining a deeper connection with experience, one that honors my nervous system's needs while loosening its grip on my freedom. As you listen, consider how this narrative intersects with your own story. What subtle boundaries has your anxiety constructed? What offerings of life have you hesitated to receive? Through honest exploration, we can begin untangling these invisible threads, creating room for presence, courage, and genuine engagement with the world around us. I woke up one morning feeling like I was moving beneath a thick fog, as if my mind was submerged in water, muffling sharp edges and dimming colors. It was as though a veil had descended, blurring the boundary between me and the world. I recall sitting at the kitchen table, cup of coffee cooling beside me, while my thoughts circled relentlessly, each one a pinprick of uncertainty. Suddenly, I realized how exhausting this constant mental turbulence was, how it sapped my energy long before the day even began. That day marked a subtle turning point. I understood that this relentless state of tension had a physical presence, shaping how I inhabited my body as much as how I navigated my mind. Over the following weeks, I started to notice my body's silent signals, an involuntary clenching of my jaw during conversations, shallow breathing during moments meant for relaxation, and a persistent tightness across my chest that never seemed to fully resolve. It was as if my muscles held secrets of unease that my mind wouldn't acknowledge. One afternoon, as I sat quietly with my eyes closed, trying to focus on the present, I felt an unexpected wave of dizziness and nausea wash over me. In that moment, it dawned on me that anxiety wasn't confined to abstract worries or future scenarios. It had embedded itself so deeply that my being responded as though under siege. The tension inside wasn't merely psychological clutter. It was a physical weight altering my very existence. Reflecting on these somatic experiences, I recognized that my body and mind were locked in a relentless dialogue, often hostile and without reprieve. My muscles, breath, and heart were either braced for impact or racing towards an imagined threat. This constant internal battle created a paradox. Despite the outward routine and smiles, I was inhabiting a state of chronic alarm that eroded moments meant for rest or joy. The connection between mind and body had become strained, and healing that fracture became essential. One evening, while wandering through an empty city park bathed in the cooling glow of street lamps, I noticed how the emptiness echoed my internal landscape. My attention sharpened to the sensation of the breeze brushing against my skin and the faint rustling of leaves. Yet, as I tried to breathe deeper, I realized my chest remained tight, resistant to relief. It was as if my body was holding on to fear with a fierce grip, unwilling to let go even when the world itself offered softness and calm. This revelation sparked a new approach. Instead of battling or resisting these sensations, I began observing them with gentle curiosity, as if meeting a wary stranger. My early attempts at this were clumsy and frustrating. There were moments I recoiled, overwhelmed by waves of discomfort or the urge to escape. However, by naming these feelings and allowing them to exist without judgment, I noticed small shifts. The tightness loosened incrementally, and each surrender felt like planting a seed of trust within myself. I remember a specific night when I lay still in bed, heart thrumming wildly, and instead of fighting the restlessness, I whispered, "It's okay to feel this." That simple act of self-kindness dialed down the fight-or-flight intensity and opened a window into a less frantic experience of anxiety. Experiencing this relationship with my body reshaped how I understood discomfort and presence. No longer was tension an enemy to expel at all costs. It became an invitation to deepen awareness and cultivate softness amid struggle. This realization spread to how I approach daily life. When I noticed my shoulders creeping up towards my ears during work or a meeting, rather than stiffening further or numbing the sensation, I tried shifting my posture mindfully, letting the muscles relax intentionally for a few moments. These small gestures of embodied care fostered pockets of relief that accumulated over time. Now, consider how this applies when you face a moment of overwhelm, during a presentation, a difficult conversation, or when racing thoughts hijack your focus. Instead of resisting or escaping, what if you gently tuned into the physical sensations in your body? What if, with compassion, you acknowledged tension or restlessness as a call for attention rather than something to suppress? I understand that this can feel counterintuitive, even risky, because anxiety often triggers a fight against feeling vulnerable. Yet, embracing this inner experience shifts the energy, not by overpowering the sensations, but by inviting dialogue and healing. An important lesson emerged as I continued this journey. Patience is essential. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. The body's habits, especially those grounded in survival instincts, are deeply ingrained, and coaxing them toward ease requires consistent tenderness. I learned to celebrate the smallest moments of respite, an exhale longer than the inhales that preceded it, a pause that allowed stillness to settle, the warmth of sunlight resting on my skin despite the storm inside. Through this evolving relationship with my bodily experience, I gradually recovered the ability to inhabit life fully. The edges of my world sharpened once more. Colors regained their brightness and textures their richness. I didn't erase anxiety. That would be unrealistic, but I redefined my presence in its company. It ceased to dictate my every breath and step. Instead, it became one piece of the whole, manageable with grace rather than dread. As we continue to unpack how anxiety can obscure enjoyment, remember that healing often grows at the meeting point between sensation and acceptance, that delicate embrace where fear softens into awareness. When you invite your body in, you reclaim a powerful ally on your path toward a life experienced deeply and authentically. There was a day when I found myself standing at the edge of an art gallery, surrounded by canvases bursting with colors and emotions, each brushstroke telling a story of life lived fully. Yet, something inside me resisted the invitation. Instead of immersing myself in the vibrant scenes, I felt a peculiar detachment, as if a glass shield separated me from the raw expressions on display. I reached out instinctively, fingers grazing an empty space just in front of a painting, longing to break through the barrier I hadn't realized had formed within. I realized then that the restlessness I'd been living with wasn't only in my mind or body. It had woven itself into my ability to connect deeply with experiences that once stirred my soul. This separation was subtle, like a soft echo fading into silence, but it gnawed at me relentlessly. I saw how the pressure to perform normalcy, for others and myself, had manufactured a quiet void where spontaneity used to flourish. My instinct to shield myself from discomfort had morphed into a habit of emotional withholding. I noticed how I'd started limiting my range of feelings, guarding the edges of joy and sorrow alike, afraid that opening fully would unleash uncontrollable waves. The art in the gallery reminded me starkly of what I had relinquished, the freedom to be vulnerable, to engage with life's full palette without reservation. Reflecting further, I understood that this emotional reticence became a silent architect of isolation. Even amid conversations or shared laughter, I felt a peculiar sense of absence, as if my spirit dipped beneath an invisible tide, leaving only a skeletal presence to interact on my behalf. This left me craving genuine connection, but the fear of exposure pushed me towards surface interactions, perpetuating a loop of loneliness. I remembered conversations where smiles masked a storm within, each word carefully chosen to avoid revealing uncertainty or fragility. Yet, these defenses exacted a heavy toll, silencing aspects of my humanity that yearned to be acknowledged. One chilly evening, wrapped in a soft sweater, I sat on the porch watching clouds chase each other across a restless sky. A friend joined me, her voice gentle as she shared stories of her struggles and small victories. I found myself wanting to answer honestly, to shed pretenses and speak from a place unguarded. For a moment, the urge to retreat wrestled with the impulse to lean in. Choosing the latter felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing the landing. But I took a breath and let the words flow, raw, unpolished, real. The relief was immediate, as if a dam had burst, flooding frozen channels with warmth. In opening that space, I reclaimed a fragment of myself I hadn't known was lost. This taught me that hiding emotions under layers of control didn't guard me. It imprisoned me. Embracing vulnerability became an act of rebellion against the numbing patterns that fostered disconnection. I began to understand playing it safe emotionally was a mirage that left my inner world arid and barren. I discovered that letting feelings arise, no matter how uncomfortable, was a declaration of freedom and an essential step toward healing. It wasn't about perfect openness, but about carving out moments where I could be sincerely present with myself and others. I recall another incident. Invited to a small gathering, I initially rehearsed responses in my head to mask anxiety and self-doubt. Yet, as the evening unfolded, I noticed subtle shifts within, an eye-catching anecdote from a friend, a genuine laugh exchanged, the kindness in passing glances. Instead of retreating, I allowed myself to be curious, to taste those connections without pretense. This step felt small but monumental, like dipping toes into a cool lake after years in a dry desert. The richness of subtle encounter awakened a thirst for more authentic exchange, encouraging me to lean into discomfort rather than circumvent it. Through these moments, I learned that true engagement demands courage and patience. When emotions surface that unsettle or frighten, it often signals the potential for growth lying beyond habitual walls. I started practicing pausing when feelings bubbled up, observing them without judgment, and trusting that I could withstand the waves instead of fleeing. These practices softened the stifling grip of self-containment and made room for creativity, empathy, and joy to re-enter my lived experience. As you reflect on your own journey, ask yourself, how might emotional withdrawal be shaping your interactions and self-perception? What could happen if you allowed fragments of your authentic feelings to emerge, even if they tremble or seem inconvenient? Holding back might feel like safety, but it also dims the vibrant presence that breathes life into our days. Inviting genuine feeling, however hesitant at first, plants seeds that eventually bloom into deeper intimacy with yourself and those around you. In this pursuit, I continue to learn the beauty of imperfect surrender. Emotional openness isn't a destination but a winding path, lined with moments that both challenge and nourish. It requires courage to break old patterns, yet every small act of vulnerability heralds freedom's soft arrival. Like a once-closed door slowly easing open to reveal a luminous room beyond, embracing the full range of our feelings calls us home, to a self alive, connected, and profoundly human. I recall sitting beneath an ancient oak, its rough bark pressing softly against my back as a quiet breeze stirred the leaves overhead. I was trying to escape the steady buzz of thoughts that looped endlessly in my mind. But in that moment, something shifted, not because I forced it, but because the stillness around me invited it. Instead of chasing control or attempting to suppress my inner unrest, I allowed myself to simply be present with the unease. It wasn't surrender born of resignation, but a curious acknowledgement that, for once, I didn't need to conquer or fix. The tension that usually gripped my chest loosened its hold just enough to let me notice the faint, almost imperceptible pulse of life beneath the surface. This was unfamiliar territory, embracing vulnerability as a doorway, not a weakness. Over time, I began to explore the quieter rhythms beneath my anxiety's clamor. Early mornings offered a canvas untouched by expectation, and I made a ritual of stepping outdoors to feel the chill of dew on my fingertips or listen to the gradual awakening of songbirds. These moments didn't erase worries but planted tiny anchors in the present, grounding me through sensory experience. For instance, I traced the intricate veins on a fallen leaf, marveling at their delicate uniqueness, realizing each line told stories of resilience and growth. My mind, usually impatient, softened when confronted with such intricate details demanding unhurried attention. It taught me patience, not with an agenda, but as an attentive witness to the unfolding moment. One afternoon, a trusted companion invited me to join a meditation session practiced outdoors. Skeptical at first, I hesitated, uncertain if stillness could genuinely soothe the storm inside. Yet, as our group settled onto worn mats beneath a cobalt sky, I felt something shift in my posture and breath. Guided gently, we learned to trace the rise and fall of our chests without interference, like surfers riding waves without forcing the ocean's hand. I noticed that anchoring attention to the breath didn't require vanquishing anxious thoughts. Instead, it involved welcoming them as passing clouds drifting across a vast sky. That realization altered my relationship with discomfort, transforming anxiety from an enemy into a guest whose presence could coexist with calm awareness. Not all encounters with my nervous system were gentle. There were days when old patterns resurfaced quickly, storms brewing behind my ribs with unpredictable ferocity. During one such episode, I escaped to an empty rooftop near my apartment, the city's hum muffled beneath me. The vast expanse above, studded with stars uncountable and unmoving, paradoxically felt both daunting and comforting. I stood there, trembling, heartbeat thrumming like a frantic drum, and reminded myself that fear could be felt fully without allowing it to dictate outcomes. "I see you," I whispered under my breath to the waves swallowing me, "and you don't own me." Those words didn't stop the tremors immediately, but planted a seed of defiance against allowing anxiety's shadows to darken my entire being. Another revelation came from examining my relationship to rest. Previously, moments of pause were brief respites, spent worrying about tasks undone or upcoming challenges. I realized that true rest required more than physical stillness. It demanded permission to release mental tension and cultivate softness toward myself. I started experimenting with small creative acts, sketching aimlessly, journaling without goal, listening to music that transported me into realms of feeling I had long avoided. Each practice nurtured a sanctuary within, a refuge where renewal was not contingent on productivity or achievement, but simply on presence and acceptance. Through these gentle acts, I reclaimed a sense of inner spaciousness, a breathing room for my essence beyond anxious chatter. At times, solitude deepened my insight. One evening, as twilight bled into night, I sat wrapped in a worn blanket, staring at flickering candle flames casting dancing shadows on walls. The flickers weren't steady or predictable, and in that irregularity, I found a metaphor for my own inner landscape, a mix of light and darkness, movement and stillness, certainty and doubt, all intertwined. Accepting this fluidity transformed my perspective. Life no longer demanded that I control every flicker, but invited me to appreciate the interplay, even when it veered into discomfort. This shift gradually changed how I approached my days. Less grasping, more receptive, allowing the unfolding flow to carry me forward rather than resisting its currents. Consider how this might resonate when your chest tightens in silent anticipation, or your thoughts surge toward a horizon of unknowns. Instead of racing to silence or outpace discomfort, imagine surrendering into a stance of gentle curiosity, embracing the sensations as messengers rather than monsters. When my own restlessness waves like untamed ocean tides, returning to breath and embodiment provides a sanctuary where the mind and body recalibrate in harmony. These weren't instant transformations, but accumulated moments, small, deliberate acts of connection that rebuilt my capacity to engage deeply and with kindness toward myself. Through these encounters with my nervous system's intricate language, I discovered resilience woven not from escaping fear, but from befriending it. Harnessing the power of mindful presence, sensory immersion, and self-compassion opened a door back into fullness, a place where anxiety no longer stole the scene, but shared space with peace. Like a patient gardener tending fragile seedlings through storms and droughts, I nurtured my capacity to thrive with acceptance and grace, learning that healing is a journey marked by continuous discovery rather than a final destination. There was an evening that stands out vividly, one where I sat on the edge of a quiet riverbank just as dusk melted into night. The sky unfurled in hues of deep indigo, and the water mirrored a shimmering tapestry of stars. Despite this breathtaking scene, my mind was a storm of restless thoughts, racing like a wild horse with no reins. The serenity around me contrasted sharply with the chaos inside, and I battled an urge to retreat into the familiar cocoon of distraction. Yet, something urged me to pause and watch the water's slow, unhurried drift. Floating leaves caught my gaze, their delicate journey tracing unpredictable paths along the current. They reminded me of life's unpredictability, the gentle surrender to flows beyond our control. I realized I had spent so much energy fighting invisible currents, trying to steer my course with sheer willpower. That night, I decided to let go just enough to observe rather than control, to witness distress without rushing to fix it. It was a fragile kind of bravery, like stepping onto shifting sand, unsure if footing would hold. But through that practice, I began to perceive anxious energy less as an enemy and more like a restless child craving attention and understanding. On another occasion, I encountered a challenge that forced my limits in an unexpected way. A close friend invited me on a spontaneous hiking trip deep into the woods, an environment far from my comfort zone, where unpredictability ruled. My first instinct was to decline. Fear whispered of getting lost, tripping, or being overwhelmed by unfamiliar sounds. But I recognized an opportunity not just to face discomfort, but to embrace the unknown. With tentative steps, I joined the trek. The forest breathed around me, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant call of birds, the scent of damp earth thick in the air. Each moment required my full attention, drawing me out of anxious spirals and into immediate experience. At the summit, as golden light spilled through towering pines, I noticed something remarkable. Despite the physical exertion and mental strain, a soft contentment settled within me. The discomfort hadn't vanished, but it no longer dictated the narrative. Instead, it coexisted with awe and satisfaction. The hike became a metaphor for navigating anxiety, not erasing difficult feelings, but allowing them to share space with wonder and gratitude. I saw that growth often occurs in the tension between challenge and acceptance, the delicate balance that transforms struggle into discovery. Later, I applied this realization in daily interactions, particularly when confronting social anxiety. I recall a dinner party where I initially felt swallowed by the noise, the rapid chatter triggering a surge of overwhelm. My instinct screamed to find an escape route, a quiet room, or even just a breath away from the crowd. But recalling my woodland lesson, I instead sought out a small circle of quiet listeners. Leaning into genuine connection, I shared a vulnerable story, one that I had rehearsed masking before. The response was unexpected warmth and understanding, a reminder that intimacy blossoms when we risk authenticity. The moment didn't dissolve all anxiety, but it softened the walls I'd carefully built. Equally significant was my discovery of how sensory grounding could tether my scattered awareness. During one particularly jittery morning, with heart fluttering and thoughts spiraling, I clumsily tried a technique I had read about, pressing my bare feet firmly into the cool tile of the kitchen floor. The sensation, simple yet tangible, threaded a path from my tumultuous mind to my immediate body. I focused on the pressure beneath each toe, the smooth hardness beneath flesh, and gradually, the clamor began to ebb. This act transformed abstract tension into something anchored and manageable. It was a vivid lesson. Even the smallest physical connection can reroute racing mental energy into life-giving presence. Another transformative moment arose from practicing creative expression. I picked up a paintbrush almost on a whim, unsure if hands out of practice could translate feelings spilled from internal turmoil. With initial hesitation, I allowed color to bleed across the canvas with no plan and no judgment. The strokes mirrored fragments of my mental landscape, wild, uneven, unpredictable. Yet in this raw portrayal, I found release and revelation. The entangled hues were not chaos, but a mosaic telling my story, scars and all. That process unveiled for me that creativity can serve as a bridge between anxious turmoil and self-compassion, inviting softness where rigid control once reigned. Reflecting on these experiences, I've come to see anxiety's grip more as a shadow that lessens when light is invited in deliberate ways. Confronting discomfort isn't about defeating it outright, but creating spaciousness where it no longer monopolizes attention. Courage blends with self-compassion, weaving resilience not from force, but from tenderness. If I could invite you into this exploration, I would ask, when faced with discomfort, how might you experiment with small acts of surrender and engagement? Could you notice the texture of your clothes against skin, the cadence of your breath as an anchor, or the quiet strength in admitting vulnerability aloud? These practices won't instantaneously dissolve fear, but they carve pathways back to aliveness. Life, after all, isn't a problem to solve, but a current to navigate. While anxiety might swirl like an undertow, leaning into awareness with gentle curiosity offers a chance to swim, not against, but within the flow. The journey isn't smooth nor straight, yet in embracing its twists and dips, I've glimpsed something precious, a reclaiming of presence that no quantity of worry can wholly steal. Reflecting on this journey so far, I find myself standing at a crossroads where countless threads of understanding intertwine, forming a tapestry both intricate and delicate. It feels as though I have traversed a dense forest, each turn revealing new light filtering through branches, shadows playing upon the undergrowth, sometimes offering clarity, other times stirring questions deeper than before. At times, I felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down, but in those moments, I discovered an unexpected strength stirring beneath, something quietly persistent that refuses to be silenced. This tension between vulnerability and resilience pulses beneath the surface of what we've explored, suggesting that beneath the tempest there lies a hidden current, steady and waiting. I've noticed that the movements within me mirror the shifting rhythms of nature itself, the ebb and flow of tides, the breath of wind coursing through open fields, the slow turning of seasons. These patterns remind me that life's pulse isn't linear or predictable, but a dance of contrasts, light and shade entwined, stillness and motion held in constant embrace. It's in these rhythms that a subtle invitation emerges, coaxing me to surrender control with a trust that feels both fragile and fierce. There's an unwritten story beneath the familiar anxieties, a narrative that beckons with soft insistence for me to listen more deeply, to embrace the complexities without haste or demand. I think of how often I cling to textures that feel safe, though they sometimes scratch beneath the skin or confine my reach. And yet stepping beyond these familiar edges ignites a mixture of apprehension and longing. In these moments, the landscape around me becomes both a mirror and a threshold, reflecting the contours of my internal struggle, while also marking the passage towards something unknown, something alive that waits just beyond what is felt comfortable. The whispers carried by the wind encourage a pivot not into immediate solution or easy answers, but toward a space where I can witness my own narratives unravel with patience and presence. There's a sense of standing on a bridge suspended between the sure ground behind and the uncertain terrain ahead. Beneath me, the river flows relentlessly, not with the fury of a storm, but with a patient persistence, carving new paths and reshaping landscapes quietly, persistently. Watching these waters, I understand that transformation unfolds not in sudden leaps, but through consistent, sometimes imperceptible movements that accumulate to shape the contours of life. The currents beneath may churn unpredictably, but the surface often appears calm, offering a deceptive simplicity that invites deeper looking. In quiet reflections, I have sat with the convergence of hope and fear, those twin companions whose tension defines much of our lived experience. I've spoken with the uneasy pulse of anticipation that accompanies stepping into vulnerability, and with the gentle absence of certainty that shimmers at the edges of comfort. These sensations coalesce not as contradictions to be resolved, but as companions to be acknowledged, reminding me that living fully includes embracing the jagged edges as much as the smooth. This acceptance births a quiet courage that doesn't roar but hums steadily, guiding footsteps through shadows without the illusion of effortless ease. There is an intimacy in recognizing that the path forward is less about mastery and more about presence, not in erasing discomfort, but in learning how to hold it alongside moments of tenderness, clarity, and even joy. I feel invited to deepen the dialogue within, honoring the full spectrum without rushing toward resolution. The journey has revealed itself as a mosaic of experiences, some brilliant and vivid, others muted and contemplative, all essential to the unfolding of a fuller, more vibrant self. I sense now that what lies ahead is an opening, a threshold beckoning me to step through with both humility and steadiness. It's a space shaped not by certainty or promises, but by a readiness to engage with life on its own terms, to meet challenge and grace in shared embrace. As I breathe into this pulse, I recognize the power residing in the stillness between moments, in the silence that sings between heartbeats, carrying the weight and the lightness of all we carry. Here, in this expansive quiet, there is room for transformation that neither rushes nor resists, but simply unfolds as it must. I remember a night when silence stretched so thickly around me that it almost pressed against my skin, demanding attention I wasn't ready to give. I sat at my window watching city lights flicker like distant fireflies, and something inside me shifted, a quiet recognition that this invisible weight I carried wasn't a permanent fixture, but a guest who needed to be witnessed, not feared. It struck me how often I'd mistaken presence for being fully alive, confusing the outward momentum of my days with genuine connection to myself and the world. That evening, though, offered a glimpse of something deeper, the potential to reclaim life's richness even in tension, to find breathing room where I thought none existed. There is an intricate dance between holding on and letting go, a rhythm I have come to understand more by feeling than by thinking alone. The tension I felt was not a barrier to living, but a complex part of my human design, a call to attune myself differently. What if, instead of resisting discomfort, I leaned into curiosity about what it might reveal about my patterns, my fears, my hidden desires? It became a practice of kindness and awareness, learning to treat moments of unrest not as enemies to overcome quickly, but as invitations into greater self-understanding. The path was uneven, filled with unexpected pauses and small victories, reminding me that healing unfolds in the subtle details of daily life. One morning, as soft light spilled through my kitchen window, I noticed the delicate play of shadows across my hands resting on the table. In that simple observation, an old urgency softened. It felt like an opening, an entry point to appreciate the unfolding of life's textures without needing to fix or change anything immediately. I realized that joy and anxiety could coexist, sometimes intertwined, weaving a rich, if complicated, human experience. Accepting this paradox freed me from the harsh expectation that peace must be constant to be real. Instead, I learned to recognize moments of calm as gifts between storms, not defeats. What stands out to me most is how transformation asks for patience. The tide of anxious anticipation may rise unpredictably, yet I have cultivated a steadiness that roots me softly when currents surge. I remember sharing this with a friend during a long walk, the air crisp and full of the scent of impending rain. "It's like learning a new language," I said, one spoken not in words but in sensations and stillness. She nodded, understanding that what we resist often persists, and only by embracing uncertainty can we move forward. This insight became a companion, shaping my daily choices and lending resilience to my steps. We carry stories shaped by struggle, yet shining with resilience. I feel invited now to tell mine without shame or haste, recognizing that vulnerability holds power when met with gentle acknowledgement. The quiet moments when I falter reveal an essential truth. Healing isn't linear, and joy isn't pristine or unbroken. Instead, they shimmer through the cracks of our imperfect selves, waiting patiently for discovery. These truths are not conclusions, but ongoing conversations, whispered in the spaces where heart beats slow and awareness deepens. If I could offer one thought to carry beyond this journey, it would be this. Life's fullness reveals itself when we dare to remain present through discomfort, to meet ourselves kindly in uncertainty, and to trust that restoration grows quietly through our willingness to show up, curious, brave, human. The invitation isn't to eradicate anxiety or to chase some elusive perfect state, but to learn how to dance amid the shadows and light, crafting a life where richness and fragility coexist. In choosing this path, I find a freedom that neither rush nor pressure can grant, only the gentle unfolding of living deeply here and now.